Welcome to the Appleseed, the storytelling podcast from BYUradio, where your family can gather for great stories from great storytellers in every episode. Stories bring us together, and we hope the stories on the show will spark memories and thoughts that you can share with the people you love. I'm Sam Payne, your host, and today we're bringing you a gift for the season, 2 stories about gift giving. We'll begin with the classic story, The Gift of the Magi. It's a beloved Christmas story written in 1905 by the author William Sidney Porter, who a lot of people know better by his pen name, O. Henry. The story is about a young couple at Christmas time, and they're strapped for cash, but each of them wants to get a secret Christmas gift for the other. And telling the story is the great Philadelphia storyteller Ed Stivender. We're pleased to have him with us here on the Appleseed. Here's Ed with The Gift of the Magi.
Thank you. 85, 86, 87. $1.87. That was all. And 62 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the vegetable man or the grocer or the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. $1.87, 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl, so Della does it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look about the home. A furnished flat for $8 a week. It does not exactly beggar description, but it has that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below, there is a letterbox, into which no letter will go. Also an electric button, from which no mortal finger can coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto is a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. Whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached the flat above, he was greatly hugged and called Jim by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with a powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray backyard. The next day would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy a present for Jim. She had been planning for months with this result. She had been saving every penny. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. $1.87 with which to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent thinking of something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood in front of the mirror. Her face had gone white in 10 seconds, but her eyes were shining brilliantly. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were 2 treasures in which the James Dillingham Youngs both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch, which had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. If the Queen of Sheba had lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair out the window to dry some day, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. If King Solomon had been the janitor, with all of his riches piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see the king pluck at his beard with envy. And now Della's hair fell about her. rippling and cascading like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. Then she did it up again, rapidly and nervously. She faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two fell on the worn red carpet. Then on went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat, and with a whirl of skirts and that brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sophronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up, Della ran. She collected herself, panting. Madame, large, chilly, too white, hardly looked the Sophronie. Will you buy my hair? I buy hair. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. Madame, weighing the mass with a practiced hand, said, $20. Oh, give it to me quick. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. Della was ransacking the stores looking for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and for no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was worthy even of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value, this description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the other 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim would be properly anxious about the time in any company. As grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap he used instead of a chain. When Della got home, intoxication gave way to prudence and reason. She took out her curling irons, lighted the gas, and went to work repairing the ravages of generosity added to love. Always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She examined her reflection in the mirror long, critically, and carefully. If Jim doesn't kill me before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? What could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the chain in the palm of her hand and sat on the corner of the table by the door he always entered. Then she heard his step away down on the first flight, and her face went white. She had a habit of saying little prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, Dear God, please make him think I'm still pretty. The door opened, and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked tired and very serious. Poor fellow, only 22 years old and to be burdened by a family. He needed a new overcoat and was without gloves. He stopped inside of the door, as motionless as a setter on the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed on Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not understand. It was not anger, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stood there with that peculiar look on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went from, "Jim, darling, don't look at me that way. I've had my hair cut off and sold it because I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice present I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair," said Jim laboriously, as if he had not yet reached that patent fact after the most difficult mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it. But don't you like me just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone." "You needn't look for it, Jim. It's gone, I tell you, gone and sold, too. Maybe the hairs on my head were numbered, but no one could count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a package, and placed it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake about me, Dell. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that would make me like my girl any less. But if you unwrap that package, you'll see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic cry of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating all of the comforting hours of the lord of the flat, for there lay the combs, the set of combs that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs they were, pure tortoiseshell, with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful, vanished hair. They were expensive combs, Della knew, and her heart had craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the coveted adornment was gone. And she hugged them to her bosom and was able to look up in a moment with a smile and dim eyes and say, "My hair grows back awfully fast, Jim." "Oh!" She leaped up like a singed cat from the fireplace. Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly on the palm of her hand. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to look for it. You're going to have to check the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it. Jim." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch, put his hands behind his head, and said, "Dell, let's put our presents away for now. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. So let's put them chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe at the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents, and being wise, their choices were no doubt wise ones, perhaps with the right of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a final word to the wise of these days, let it be said, of all who give and receive gifts, such as these are wisest. They are the Magi.
The Gift of the Magi. O. Henry's classic about sacrifices made for the giving of gifts at Christmas, told for you by Ed Stivender. That's a story that has seen a lot of versions over the years. When I was a kid, I remember seeing on television the Sesame Street version of the story, a version in which Ernie sells his rubber ducky to Mr. Hooper in exchange for a Christmas gift for Ernie's buddy Bert, a cigar box where Bert can store his paperclip collection. Of course, Bert has sold his paperclip collection to Mr. Hooper in exchange for a Christmas gift for Ernie, a soap dish where Ernie can display his rubber ducky. I still love that version of the classic story. But when I hear Ed Stivender tell the story here on the Appleseed, I'm reminded of a real-life sacrifice made for the giving of a gift that, like the gifts in O. Henry's story, might have been described, at least at first, as having limited usefulness to the receiver. My grandfather, Leland J. Payne, long ago when he had married his first sweetheart, Arilda Madeline Anderson, scrimped and saved and bought for her a piano. And when he bought it, they both knew that Arilda had a heart condition that would shorten her life quite severely. She would, in fact, only be with my grandfather for about 4 years before she passed on. It must be said that she filled those years with music, playing herself and teaching piano lessons to neighborhood kids. But again, long before her time, that piano fell silent. But the gift that my grandfather had purchased for his dear Arilda kept giving, as good gifts so often do. One of her little neighborhood piano students, a kid named Gerald Otley, would grow up to be the longtime director of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And the piano that sat silent for a while after Arilda's passing would eventually become the piano that moved into my father's house when he left home and started a family, which means it's the piano on which I learned to play as a child. Still stands in my dad's home today, a reminder of so many good things. And that's where Ed Stivender's telling of the gift of the Magi took me. Where did it take you? And who will you take along? I want to introduce you to another show from the BYUradio family of podcasts. It's called The Lisa Show, and it's hosted by comedian, believer, actress, single mother Lisa Valentine Clark. The Lisa Show delves into the multitude of challenges and relationships that shape our lives, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, social issues. She and her council of moms will tackle it. She'll help you figure out this thing called life with a lot of laughs along the way. Lisa is a great person to hang around with. The Lisa Show, listen wherever you get your podcasts. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all kinds of places to listen to The Lisa Show whenever you like. The Lisa Show from BYU Radio. There's a lot coming up, but I want to take just a moment to let you know about another show from among the BYUradio family of podcasts. The podcast is called Constant Wonder, and it's hosted by Marcus Smith. In each episode, Marcus takes you on kind of a quest to find the awe and wonder in all nature, human or wild. Not just interested in the natural world, interested in human nature as well. Marcus's guests tell fascinating stories and talk about experiences that have left them awestruck. You'll love the podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all kinds of places to listen to Constant Wonder anytime you need a little dose of awe or wonder in your life. Constant Wonder from BYU Radio. It's a pleasure to be with you on the Appleseed today, where we have one more gift to share. A story by the West Virginia storyteller Adam Booth. It's a delightful mix of Appalachian tall tale and heartwarming holiday story that asks, how does a snowed-in Appalachian town get its Christmas gifts? It's a story called Uncle Ephraim and the Blue Snow. We recorded it live in the Appleseed studio. Here's Adam.
Thank you all. Long ago in the mountains, way, way long ago in the mountains, they talked about the blue snow. So, today it snows when it gets cold, but when it gets really cold, it can't snow. It's too cold to snow, but they said back in the day that when it got really, really cold, it reached another period or another phase where it could snow again. But a special kind of snow would fall. They called it the blue snow. Because to look out your window, everything just looked a little bit blue with a special kind of snow. Well, one morning, old Uncle Ephraim woke up and everything had this blue glow about it. And he thought, could it have happened? I'd heard tell about it, but I'd never seen it with my own eyes. And he jumped out of bed and dashed across the room and looked out the window, and everything out in creation was covered with that blue snow. He thought, I got to go outside and see it. He opened the door and slammed the door and said, no, I don't. He put on his coat first and several pairs of long johns and then went out to see it. And that cold had come on so fast that the flowers had bumblebees frozen to them. And there were long yellow beams right there on the snow. He thought, well, what could that be? And when he examined it, he realized that it had frozen so fast that sunbeams had just cracked off and fallen right down. And he thought, well, I won't be able to get into town to get me something to eat today. Well, what'll I do? And he looked all around and saw down there at the pond, his prayers had been answered. There must have been 200 ducks frozen in that icy pond now. And he looked around and went to the old woodpile and picked up one that could be a nice club. Took it down there and thought, I'll just whack one of them, and that'll be my supper. And he whammed down like that. Now, don't worry. Don't worry. He whammed like that, and it was so hard, that ice was, that instead of whacking the duck, it kind of went up down his arm, and his bones just rattled, and his jaw clicked against his skull, and that ice just shattered right off. And that duck, which had been frozen mid-quack, said, "Ack," started flapping its wings, quack, quack. The bottom half of it was still frozen down in the ice. Well, he went to the next one because this one was shooing him away, and bam, like that, and it shivered up his bones, and the ice cracked off of this one, and that one started quacking at him and flapping its wings at him, and he went around to this one and that one and this one and that one, and we got to that 200th duck, and wham, like that, and the ice fell off, and I got to tell you, there were now 400 wings flapping like this. And that was enough power to lift that 6 inches of frozen top of the lake right up into the air. With all those ducks flapping and quacking like that, and old Uncle Ephraim was just standing right on it. There was nowhere to go but with them. And you know where ducks want to go, right? They wanted to go south. So this big old disc of ice up in the air with 200 ducks flapping like this and quacking took off flying out of the mountains. And by the time they got to Tennessee, well, it was a little warmer there, and the outsides of that disc had started to melt, and a few ducks were free and flew away and came down a little lower. And when they got to North Carolina, a few more melted away, and they flew off, and it got a little lower. And by the time they got down to Georgia, it was so warm that the rest of that ice just melted all away, and all the ducks flew away, and poor old Uncle Ephraim was now just falling out of the sky. Well, what was left of that lake was just a little puddle under his feet falling down like this, and they were falling so fast that it froze right back up into a snowflake that big that he was standing on, and it just kind of back down towards the earth and until they were about 10 feet away from the earth, and it was warm enough that that snowflake just melted and evaporated, and Uncle Ephraim fell right down the rest of those 10 feet. Right on top of a man who was standing there. Thump, like that. And he knocked that man plumb out, right on the ground. And when he stood up, there was another man standing right there, a peddler. I said this was an old story. A peddler was a person that'd go around and sell wares out of a pack. And that peddler said, "Oh, thank you." He grabbed his arm and started pumping it up and down. "Thank you, you saved my life. That man was trying to rob me." And in payment for saving his life, he just turned his whole pack of goods right over to old Uncle Ephraim. And Uncle Ephraim, he wanted to get back home, so he started walking back north and found his way back up to the part of the Appalachian Mountains where we live. And as he made his way up into the holler, well, the last of that blue snow had just melted away. And he heard a bell ringing in the distance. It made him realize today was Christmas Day. And because all the people had been stuck in their homes with that blue snow, they hadn't been able to go out and get things to celebrate the holiday. And so he opened up that pack and put gifts on the doorsteps of all the people up and down that town. A doll or a ball, maybe a new axe and a skillet, so that when the people finally came out to celebrate Christmas, there were some nice gifts there. Till that pack was empty. And Uncle Ephraim, well, he'd had enough adventure for a whole season. So he went to his home and laid down to take him a nice, long winter's nap. He'd earned it. And he slept through the rest of the winter and didn't wake up until the spring had come around. And boy, if you want to know what happened then, well, I don't have time to tell you tonight, but I can tell you it was many more adventures that we'll save for another time. Thank you all. Thanks, everybody.
Adam Booth with his story, Uncle Ephraim and the Blue Snow. Do you have special holiday stories you share every year with your family? Is there a gift that you gave or received at Christmas that fills you with poignant memories of someone important to you? What's your favorite family memory at this time of year? Whatever your traditions, make time to share those memories with the people you love. We want to thank Ed Stivender and Adam Booth for sharing with us today. You've listened to their stories. Now it's time to share some of your own. The Appleseed is produced by me, Sam Payne, Wendy Folsom, Brian Tanner, and Kira Van Dam. Our audio engineer is DJ Cromarty, and the rest of the Appleseed team is Tristan Schetzel, Kay Hendricks, and Nico Wetzel. And if you like today's podcast, subscribe, rate us, leave us a review, and tell your friends. That's how the podcast grows. We also love to receive emails. Email us at theappleseed@byu.edu. That's theappleseed, all one word, at byu.edu. Your thoughts and comments help us shape the future of the Appleseed. We're pleased and proud to be among the many podcasts produced by the BYU Radio family of shows. If you want more great storytelling for the whole family, then search for our companion podcast, Kaboom, where you'll hear original audio adventures for the whole family. You can find any episode of The Appleseed or Kaboom on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on the BYU Radio app, or at byuradio.org. I'm Sam Payne, and we can't wait to be with you again on The Appleseed.